Hello and welcome to our virtual Sunday School class. In this session we will continue our study from the Old Testament book that we call the Psalms. We're looking specifically at Psalm number 37, at least the first 11 verses of the 37th Psalm today. We previously noted that there are 150 individual songs or poems or psalms as we call them in this one book. The original Hebrew canon, when the Hebrew scholars originally put together the Old Testament, they divided these 150 into 5 separate books. And so what we call one book is really a collection of books. We're still looking in the first book when we look in Psalm 37 today. These 150 individual psalms, we said, were written over a period of 700 years. And we don't know who wrote all of them. We know that most of the Psalms, that is all but 34 of them, have a superscription which gives us some indication as to who wrote some of them. Some of these superinscriptions or superscriptions tell us that they were written by a particular person. Other of the superscriptions actually give us instruments that should be used in singing the psalm or instructions on how to sing the psalm, that type of thing. Some of the superscriptions give us the occasion on which that psalm was written. But some of those superscriptions do identify people to whom the psalm is attributed, and we're going to be looking at one today that is attributed to David. If this was written by David, and I say if because the superscription says of David, and some suggest that means it was written by David. Others suggest that it was written and dedicated to David. Others suggest that this is a psalm that someone else wrote that David collected with his psalms. So we're not positive, but assuming that David wrote this, and we believe that he did write 73 of these, including the 37th Psalm, assuming he wrote that, it probably would have been written later in his life. And the reason I say that is in verse 25 of the 37th Psalm, it reads, I was young, now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken nor their children begging bread. Giving us an indication that the author, and if it was David, he was writing in his later years. This 37th Psalm, as we look at it, is a little unusual. It's written as an acrostic. Now, what does that mean? An acrostic means that each stanza is to begin with the first word of that stanza begins with a particular letter. For example, in this acrostic, the first word in the first verse begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Then, when you get to the first word of the first verse of the second stanza, or when you get to verse 3, that first word begins, the first letter of that first word is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. When you get down to the third stanza, which begins at verse 5, the first letter of the first word in verse 5 begins with the third letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it follows all the way down through the Hebrew alphabet. It would be like the first stanza beginning with a word, the first letter of the first word in the first line would begin with A. Then when you get down to line 3, the first word begins with the letter B, and then when you get down to line 5, the first letter of the first word is C, going all the way through Z. Now, you understand that's a little more difficult way to write, and when you've got to pick words that begins with the right letter but also fits into the context of what you're trying to say. But this is an acrostic. And one of the reasons a writer would use this format is especially for a wisdom psalm, like this one we will see is a wisdom psalm. It makes it easier to memorize. A is for this, B is for this, C is for this, and you can memorize it that way easier. It took a lot of time to be able to write a poem, and then to make sure you're using words that begin with the right letter to fit in your pattern. Now, what we're going to be looking at is the first 11 verses, which really are only 6 stanzas, and we are only involving the first 6 verses of the Hebrew alphabet. We're not looking at the remainder of the psalm that finishes up the Hebrew alphabet. The acrostic form also gives you a sense of orderliness and predictability. In other words, you expect when you get down so far that you're going to have a word that begins with G, and then you expect the next time the word's going to begin with H, and then I, and then J. There's a predictability and orderliness, and we use the colloquial, well, he covered that from A to Z. We see this as an indication of completeness. A to Z, completely involved. And so the use of the acrostic style is more difficult for the author to use to compose what he's trying to say, but it does carry with it a sense of orderliness and completeness. And the psalmist here wants to suggest that what he is saying is speaking of a God who is orderly and complete. There's a sense of rhythm here that's also involved in this psalm that again would make it more difficult to write. In other words, it takes a skilled writer to write with rhythm. Now, in our understanding of poetry, we would talk about rhyme and we would talk about rhythm. Well, in this particular poem, this particular psalm, there are stanzas, each of them about the same length. So you've got a sense of rhythm here, about the same length. If you check, verse 7 is the shortest. It only has 11 Hebrew words. And verses 8 and 9 is one of the longest, and it has 16 Hebrew words. All the stanzas have at least 7 or less than 16, so they're similar in their length. Most of the stanzas, now verse 7 is an exception, but most of the stanzas are 4 lines long. 2 verses, 4 lines. The first line is echoed by the second line, and then the third line is echoed by the fourth line. A, repeat A, B, repeat B. In most of the stanzas, the first 2 lines are commands, do this, do this. The second 2 lines are the results, or the why, or the explanation. The first command, do this. The second command helps you understand what the first one, because it's repeating the same thing, is a parallel here. And then they give you 2 whys, or 2 results. Now, not all the stanzas are like this, but we're going to see that most of them are. Now, what I'm saying here, what I'm trying to convey here is, with similar length and with this repetition, do this, because, do this, because, there is a rhythm that builds. And once again, this requires skill on the part of the author to write in this kind of poetry style. Now, we're not real sure as to when in David's life he wrote this. We said in his older years, but we're not real sure exactly which events of his later life are motivating him to write this particular poem. From reading the context of the poem, it seems that there must have been a time, or this was written at a time, when people were looking around and they are saying, why is it the wicked seem to prosper? Why is it that the harder I try to live for God, it seems like the further I get behind, and these people over here are so wicked and evil, but they seem to be prospering. Why is that? And obviously it's raising the question, is it worth it? Should I be doing what I'm doing? And whether this is written to the individual or to the nation is also of some discussion by the writers. But the idea is, the implication is that seemingly The wicked are prospering, the righteous are not, and why should I continue on? What advantage is there to my living a righteous life? Now remember, righteousness suggests right relationship with God, right relationship with other people. Why should I worry about a righteous life if I'm not going to make out as well as they are and they're living evil, wicked lives? Well, with that background, let's begin and let's start in chapter 37. If you have your Bible, I suggest you open it because we can look at it and I can try to point these stanzas out to you. The first stanza of the poem are verses 1 and 2. Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass they will soon wither, like green plants they will soon die away. Now you see how this fits the pattern I talked about. We start with the two commands. Do not fret because of those who are evil. And then impliedly, do not be envious of those who do wrong. They're the two commands. Then we have the two results. Why? For they are like grass, for like the grass, they will soon wither away. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Okay? Let's go back and look at that in a little bit more detail. Do not fret, do not be envious. Fret and envious are parallels, if you will. We're saying the same thing twice. Do not fret. Now the word fret in the Hebrew is the word chara, and it means to burn or be kindled with anger. It also can mean to worry, and some places it's talking about just outright fits of anger. When the scholars, the Hebrew scholars, translated the Old Testament into Greek in that book we call the Septuagint, which was done in the 1st century BC, or 2nd century BC, when they translated the Hebrew into Greek, they chose the Greek word parazello. Now, this word literally means to stimulate emotion or provoke anger. It comes from a verb, zeo, which means to be hot, to bubble up, to boil, like boiling water. So the picture of fret is one whose heart is boiling with this emotion. And the emotion is anger or jealousy or envy. And he says, do not fret. Do not allow yourself to become worked up and boil over with anger or jealousy or envy. The verb is in the imperative. It's a command. You do. It's in the negative. You do not. You should not fret. You should not allow yourself. Obviously, the suggestion here is there's a choice. And he said you should live a life where you do not allow yourself to get so overwrought with worry, with anger, with jealousy. Now, he says, do not fret, do not be envious. So this gives us a little idea of what the worrying's talking about, and that is, as you look around, you see others are doing well, and you want what they're doing, how they're doing. You want the way, the prosperity that they have. And he says, don't do that. Don't allow yourself to get worked up because he refers to them as evil and those who do wrong. Again, it seems that those who were doing wrong were prospering. The righteous maybe weren't prospering as much, and they're saying, why? And they're worried, they're fretting, they're boiling up with anger, or they're boiling up with envy or jealousy. In the second command, when he said, do not be envious, that gives us a good help in understanding what fret means. The natural response in our humanness is to worry. The natural response in our humanness is, why can't I have what they have? But God's direction is, don't worry. Don't get yourself caught up in this frenzy. And then he gives us the why. He gives us the reason. For like grass, they will soon wither. These folks who are prospering, even though they are evil or wicked, like grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. And the author, David, is taking his readers to an agricultural picture that they clearly understood. And that is, they frequently saw grass today, green, healthy, but then the blistering heat causes it to wither and dies, and it's done away with. It's of no value. It is like the plants. Plants can be alive today, but gone tomorrow. And he said, these who are prospering, don't get worked up about them because they're like these plants. Yeah, they may be prospering today, but it won't last. It's not going to happen. Now, remember back in the first psalm, he referred, the psalmist, David, used the image of chaff. And we talked about that. That was blown away. It was worthless. Again, we're talking about an agricultural image, that is of grass or green plants that are here today, seemingly healthy, everything seems to be going okay, and then they're gone, just like that. So that's the first stanza. This is wisdom literature. He's teaching the reader on how to live a righteous life, and he says, don't fret because of those who are evil, or don't be envious of those who do wrong, for like grass they will soon wither, like green plants they will soon die away. Then we come to the second stanza, verses 3 and 4. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. There are your commands. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. There's a result. Okay, the two commands. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy its safe pastures. Those are the commands, the verb. To trust, now we're talking about a matter of faith. To trust, commit yourself to him. Live in such a way that you trust him. Not only that you have a mental belief and a mental assent there is a God, but you believe in him such that you're willing to rely on him, to entrust your life into his hands. So he says, trust in the Lord and do good. When you do trust in the Lord, you will be doing acts of goodness. Acts of goodness come out of that faith. Acts of goodness come out of that commitment, that trust. This is the opposite of fretting. He started off, don't fret. Now he says the opposite of that is trust. Trust in the Lord. And then he says, dwell in the land. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Now, this is a reference, and to his readers, this would be far more important than what we would see it. To his readers, he's saying, remember where you're living. You're living in the land that God promised to Abraham. You're living in the land that God kept his promise by taking the children of Israel and giving it to them. He gave them this land. They are living right where he has planned for them to live. Now, we would take it and analogize that to say living in his presence, living in his grace. But for them specifically, they were living in the land that God had promised them. They were living where they were because God had made a promise, and God has kept his promise. And they said, you should trust in the Lord. You should dwell in the land and enjoy safe pastures. You should understand that God has given this to you and live in his presence and in relationship with him and enjoy all that he has to give you. Then he gives them the whys. Take delight in the land. What he's saying is, when you're living there, you're going to take delight in the Lord. You are going to enjoy all that he's promised you. You are once again going to be reminded he is a promise-making, promise-keeping God. And he has kept his promise for you, and you can enjoy the benefits of that now, and you have the assurance that he is going to keep his promise in the future. That's enjoying his pastures. That's and the safety of his pastures. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. This is living in his presence. This is when your heart is committed to him. Your heart wants what he wants, and he will give you the desires of your heart. So that's the second stanza. This is how you live in right relationship with God. Trust in the Lord, do good. dwell in the land, enjoy the pastures, live and delight in the Lord. That's a result of trusting Him. And He'll give you the desires of your heart. Another result of trusting in Him. Now we get down to the third stanza, verses 5 and 6. We get to the commands. Commit your way to the Lord, trust Him, and He will do this. Then the reasons, the whys. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. The commands. Commit your ways. Trust Him. Commit literally means to roll. So what we're talking about when he says commit your way to the Lord, roll your life onto the Lord. Roll your burdens onto Him. Roll the things that are beyond you. This is where man lives. He's either lives serving himself, trying to do everything for himself. That's the evil, that's the wicked. Or he's living in a life of righteousness, and that is he's trusting God. He recognizes he can't, and he entrusts God with all the situations. The commit, the faith. Now we're talking about faith now. To commit means you roll yourself onto Him. You roll your problems onto Him. Look how he says it. He says, commit your way to the Lord. Now the parallel, in other words, explaining what commit, he says, trust in Him. Trust in Him. To commit, to roll yourself onto Him, to trust Him. Give Him your concerns. Give Him your problems and trust Him with them. And then he gives you the whys. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn. Now, this can also be translated, He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light. That's the way the King James translates it. The idea is your lifestyle will be that which will be seen by other people. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn. He is going to reveal who you are. Others will see that. And then he comes back and gives us the second statement, which kind of helps us with that first why. He says, your vindication like noonday sun. Situation seems to be this. As people are looking at you and see you suffering, seemingly, in the human economy of things. You don't have as much, you're not as prosperous, things aren't going as well for you. And they're looking at you from, although their evil and wicked perspective, they seem to be in abundance. They're looking at you and going, why in the world are you living like that? God is saying that through the psalmist is saying that when you commit your way to the Lord and you trust in Him, He will make your lifestyle, your righteous reward, your righteous living, your relationship with God, He will make it shine like the dawn. And then he says, your vindication. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to prove that you are right. God will vindicate you. God will vindicate you in the end. And your vindication, the fact that you are living this righteous life, will shine like the noonday sun. Now, the poet here is using another poetic feature called intensification, starting with one and then moving to a more intense. He started there by saying, in that first why in this stanza, He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn. Then he comes back and says, your vindication like the noonday sun. There's an intensification, starting with the daylight at dawn, when you can see, and then the noonday sun when it is very bright and very obvious. God is going to take care of you and vindicate you. The implication is you don't need to vindicate yourself. You don't have to worry about it. You don't need to be caring for yourself. He will take care of you. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. What will He do? He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. This is lasting. This is not temporary, but this is lasting. When we get down to verse 7, we get a break in this pattern. Now, verse 7 is a stanza by itself. Now, let me go back and remind you, the scriptures were not divided into verses until the 16th century. So when this was written, there were no verse designations. Verse 7 has 4 lines in it, like verses 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. In other words, it's the same length, almost the same length. The people in the 16th century divided into verses made this one single verse rather than 2 for whatever reason. In this stanza, he starts with, he says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." Now, this stanza is different in that it has only the commands. It does not give us the whys, the result. The others had 2 commands, 2 results, 2 commands, 2 results. This one gives us the commands. Look at the commands. Be still and wait. Do not fret. Okay, those are the commands. Be still and wait. Do not fret. Now, when he talks about the idea of being still and waiting, don't worry, don't fret, it gives you this picture of rest. We could sum this up by saying relax. Relax. Be still and wait. In our this is very difficult for us, our humanists. Our humanists, we want everything now. Instant grits, instant potatoes, instant success, instant gratification for everything. And he says, relax. Be still and wait. Not easy for us in our humanists. He seems to be tying this waiting, and look how what he says by being still. Waiting in silence. Seems to be tying this back to his promise of vindication. In our humanness, we feel like we've got to vindicate ourselves. And he said, no, just be still and wait. Wait silently. He'll take care of it. He will vindicate you. You don't have to defend yourself. He will take care of you. Patiently wait on him. In our humanness, when things aren't going our way, we have a temptation to murmur, to fuss, to carry on. And he says, wait a minute. Be still. Relax. Patiently wait in silence. Okay? This idea of if your confidence is in him, then chill out, as we would say today. Relax. It's okay. Be still before the Lord. Wait patiently for him. Be still. Be quiet. Relax. Wait patiently for him. Remember, his timetable is not always our timetable. Wait patiently for him. Okay? Then he says, don't fret. We've talked about this fret before. Worry, emotion, anger, boiling over. Don't fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Don't fret about that. Don't get worked up about that. That's the 2 commands of that stanza. Be still and wait. Don't fret. When we get to verses 8 and 9, in the 5th stanza, we're coming back to the pattern again. We resume the pattern we had in stanzas 1, 2, and 3. And that is, we start with the commands. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. Those again are the commands. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. Now we're getting to see this fret to include not only the worry, but also the anger and the jealousy. Refrain from anger. Stay away from anger. We're repeating this lifestyle. We are repeating a emphasis on a lifestyle that he's already talked about. He started off saying, don't fret. Now he's saying it again. Don't fret. Refrain from anger. Turn from the wrath. Get away from all of these. Don't live your life in response such that your emotions have got control. In other words, these are describing the lifestyle of the relaxation, of the rest. When we are self-dependent and something's out of our control, we react with anger or jealousy. We react with emotion. But if we realize we're not in control and we allow him to handle it, we can take that attitude of relaxing, of sitting quietly, etc. Then he gives us the whys we should live like that. For those who are evil will be destroyed. Those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. once again, this reference to inherit the land is a reference back to the promise that God had made through Abraham to this people, Israel, that they would one day own that land. And that's exactly where they were living. And the idea is that those whose hope is in the Lord will inherit the land. They will be right where God planned for them to be. They will enjoy the benefits of God's promise. And of course, God's promise to them when they came out of Egypt was that they would have that land. But he also talked that if they would in fact obey him, they would prosper in that land. And that's what inheriting that land meant, inheriting all the promises that that land had for them. And who was it that was to inherit the land? Those whose hope is in the Lord. This is the opposite of the ones described in the prior statement. For those who are evil will be destroyed, now the opposite side, but those whose hope is in the Lord will inherit the land, have all that God has intended for them to have, all the protection, the provision, the prosperity that God had promised them would be theirs if their hope was in the Lord. Then we come down to stanza number 6. This is the last one we'll be looking at in the lesson today. Stanza number 6 involves verses 10 and 11. Now this stanza number 6 is much like stanza number 4 in that it's a break in the regular pattern. It's a break in the normal rhythm. In this particular stanza, there are no commands. Unlike the others, except for stanza number 4, there were 2 commands followed by 2 results. Stanza number 4 had the 2 commands but had no results. This particular stanza has the results but doesn't have the commands. So some say this is a continuation of the earlier stanza. But look how it reads. No commands, but it starts off, a little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. Okay, here are the results. Here are the results of living this lifestyle, living in his presence and enjoying his protection and provision. He said, you compare this with what happens to the wicked. He starts off with the negative comparison. He says, even if you're looking for the wicked, you won't be able to find them after a little while. Suggestion, God's timetable is not the same as man's. After a while, there may come a point in time. In other words, don't get upset about the circumstances now, but look at it from a longer perspective. As we had a former pastor used to talk about looking at things in the million-year perspective. What's going to be important a million years from now? He said, a little while, it's going to take a while, different timetable, the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they'll not be found. Like the chaff, worthless, like the grass and the plant that dries up and is destroyed is no more, the wicked will be no more. It may take a while. They may prosper for a while, but their prosperity is temporary. That's the one side, the one result. But then look at the other one. But the meek will inherit the land. He's back to this promise of inheriting the land, the presence of God, the promise of God, the provision, prosperity, and protection of God. This belongs to the meek. Now, who are the meek? The meek, again, those whose hope is in the Lord, as in that last stanza. The meek are those who have come to the conclusion that they can't do it themselves. When they've gotten beyond themselves and they're ready to entrust their life to God. When they've gotten beyond themselves and they're saying, I can't do it, I will allow you. I will trust you. I will commit myself to you. See all these commands we're talking about earlier in the psalm? This is who the meek are. Meek meaning that they no longer are asserting themselves, but they're willing to sit back and let God. They're willing to allow Him the right to lead, to guide, to direct. They'll take their priorities, set them aside, and surrender to Him. The meek will inherit the land and will enjoy peace and prosperity. Once again, we're talking about this living in the presence of God. We're talking about this this provision, protection that God promises. This is the promise-making, promise-keeping God. And he says the meek. Sounds just like Matthew 5:5 in that third beatitude when Jesus said, the meek shall inherit the earth. This is a quote from the psalmist. It is the meek, those who have surrendered themselves and who are giving themselves over to God. They're the ones. This whole psalm so far, that this whole area that we've looked at today, is talking about how to live the good life. How do they live the life in the presence of God, in righteous relationship with God? And he has the commands of don't fret, don't worry, don't try to do it all yourselves, but instead commit, relax, allow God to work on his time at his timetable. This psalm was written for particular people who were experiencing a particular issue. And maybe that issue was the wicked were prospering, and there was some concern by the righteous as to whether their righteousness was worth the effort. But it also has a special meaning to us today, especially in the day in which we live, when everything is out of our control, when even the medical problems seem to be beyond the ability of our best scientists to figure out and give us all the answers, the political problems, the economic problems. This world is spinning out of control, and in the human response, we respond with emotion, anger, jealousy, fear. And then the psalmist comes to us and he says, don't fret, don't worry, but rather commit yourself, surrender, rest, relax, trust and obey. This is the call to us this week in our uncertain world. But boy, that trusting is hard. Let me illustrate with a story. Old story, you've probably heard it before, but I'll tell it to you again. You see, there was this famous circus star who was known for being able to walk a tightrope. He could walk a tightrope suspended in the air and just really amaze people. Well, he started traveling from community to community in the area where there were some mountains and some waterfalls. And what he would do is he would put up posters and says, on Saturday, I will be out at the waterfall. I'm going to string my rope up across the river, and I'm going to walk that tightrope across the waterfall. Saturday came, everybody in town had gathered out there. He stretches his rope across the waterfall, and he says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to walk the tightrope. Anybody here think I can do it? Well, two other people say, yeah, I saw you in the circus, you can do it. So he gets out and he walks to one side and turns around and walks back. And the crowd is very excited and they're applauding. Then he says, okay, I'm going to do it again. But this time, I'm going to make it a little more difficult. This time, I'm going to push a wheelbarrow. He said, anybody think I can make it across pushing a wheelbarrow? Silence. And then in the back, one voice spoke up and says, yeah, I think you can do it. And the performer responded, well, then crawl in the wheelbarrow. Where are we living this week? Where is our trust? Is our relationship with God more than a mental assent? Are we ready to crawl in the wheelbarrow? Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your promises to us. We thank you for time and time again how we have seen your faithfulness in keeping your promises. And now as we face uncertain times, even in our own lives, we ask that you would enable us and equip us to put our faith totally into your hands, into you, and to put ourselves and our trust into your hands. Father, forgive us when we become fretful and worrying and we try to take things into our own hands. Today we surrender ourselves into your hands and pray the prayer that your Son taught us to pray. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in my life, in our world today. We surrender ourselves into your care. We crawl into your wheelbarrow today, trusting you. Amen. Thank you very much.